Okay, let me see how many participants we have. All right. I'll give it a moment because it's welcoming everyone in. Okay. I guess at any time here, I could start with just a little introduction and a welcome.
Yeah.
It's still loading. I can see people are entering, so I'll just give it one more minute here, and so that we can stay on time for everyone's schedules today. Um,
I didn't time my talk,
that's
so I don't know how
that's
long
okay. Everybody's been eagerly anticipating this talk, so I'm sure no one's going to mind if it goes over a little bit, and it's all recorded, so it will be shared afterwards. So I can see the number keeps increasing. So I'll just start with a bit of an introduction here. I would like to welcome everyone to the iRise and Shine Wellness Collective webinar series that we're putting on. My name is Jillian, and I'm the founder and chief executive officer of the iRise Above Foundation. And for those of you who have not heard of us, I'd like to take this opportunity to share a little bit about who we are and what our purpose is. We are a nonprofit organization that strives for outstanding quality of life, empowerment, and inspirational support for young women diagnosed with breast cancer. We believe that every young woman deserves to live a great story and not be defined by breast cancer. As a young woman diagnosed with breast cancer, you face a unique set of challenges that your older counterparts, does not. Our mission is to surround young women with targeted, age-appropriate, and connected health and wellness resources and tools to enable them to rise above the residual effects of breast cancer, heal, and live well. This week, we recognized International Women's Day, and the theme this year was choose to challenge. It indicates that a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. At the iRise Above Foundation, we work to challenge old paradigms and change perceptions of what it means to have breast cancer, particularly as young women. We need to completely change the conversation about breast cancer to be one, more inclusive of all women. Breast cancer does not discriminate. It does not care about your age, your gender, your race, your religious affiliation, your national identity, country of origin, or socioeconomic status. And also, we need to change the conversation around how we effectively treat breast cancer in a holistic, integrative way. So to this end, it's appropriate that a powerful female change maker presents the March iRise and Shine Wellness Collective webinar. A woman who changes the status quo and has helped to change and improve the lives of so many people along the way affected by all sorts of different cancers, including my life. I thrive and I have metastatic breast cancer and have been doing exceptionally well for 4 years. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome today's guest, Jane Mcclellan, who will be speaking to us about how to starve breast cancer, particularly with respect to, how to starve cancer, particularly with respect to breast cancer. And a little bit about Jane for some of you who don't know her. Jane is a trained physiotherapist and a 4-time cancer survivor. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cervical cancer 20 years ago, and she beamed her cancer with her wisdom and science. She has mapped the landscape of cancer metabolism in a new way that everyone can understand. Jane discovered a unique approach that combines diet, exercise, nutritional supplements, and off-label low toxicity drugs that, when taken together as a metabolic cocktail, acts synergistically to kill even the toughest cancer. Jane is regarded as a modern day cancer Sherlock Holmes. Her most famous contribution is the Mcclellan Metro Map of Cancer Metabolism. She has painted the complicated cancer metabolism pathway with simplicity and clarity. Jane has helped countless patients over the years. This was recognized in 2019 when she was awarded Amazing Women Global Lifetime Achievement Award for her work. And her new book, or her book, How to Starve Cancer, has become an international bestseller with translations rights sold to 15 countries. Her book has won the New York City Big Book Award and Janie Love's Gold Award for Outstanding Book in Health in the Health Arena. With her approach being adopted by doctors and researchers all over the world, Jane has caused a global revolution with tens of thousands of grateful patients, me being one of them. So Jane, I'm honored to welcome you today to speak to our participants, our community.
Great. Okay, I'm looking forward to it. So shall I just fire ahead with sharing my presentation? And then afterwards, if people want to send in questions, I think I believe you've got quite a few already.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I didn't time my presentation, so I don't know how long it's going to be, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I'll just share my screen. Hang on a second. I need to go back to the beginning. Okay, so can you see that? Is that clear to you? Okay, all right. So okay, so I'll talk a little bit about myself to begin with. Gillian's introduced me. I am a chartered physiotherapist. That is kind of the only proper medical background that I have. Everything that I have learned since has really become, I've just learned purely from being thrown in at the deep end and actually having to work it out for myself, being a kind of a guinea pig. But it's not the only thing I've done in my life. When I was physio, I took a slightly different tack. I sort of did a slightly entrepreneurial thing with publishing something called Bathrobics, which was a sort of waterproof book that you stuck on the side of your bath with a little rubber sucker, and that did really well. But whilst I was doing all that, I was going for smears, I went for a colposcopy, I had that done, and then I was told everything was fine. But this actually wasn't, in fact, true. And it turns out that the doctor I was under, unfortunately, was not treating his women properly. He wasn't doing the proper smears. Something like he would only send off 64%, do biopsies on 64% rather than a minimum of 90% of the patients. And I was completely missed. He kept telling me there was nothing wrong. He gave me progestin, which probably made it worse. So it was an unfortunate situation. It was only when I was getting weight loss and losing weight from areas that I don't normally lose weight, I thought, you know what, I've just got to sort this out. I went privately, and within 3 days I was then in hospital back in London, having a Vertimes hysterectomy. I then had chemo, radiotherapy, usual stuff, lost the use of my ovaries, lost my fertility. And that to me at the time was actually more devastating than in fact being diagnosed with the cancer. To me, I felt like I'd really died already. The whole having a family was much more important to me than actually survival at the age of 30, which is what I was at the time. So between 1994 and 96, I kind of did what I was told. I didn't do anything different. I just had the usual conventional treatment. I didn't look beyond that. But it was only in 1996 when my mum was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer that I kind of woke up to the fact that I needed to look beyond that. And in fact, I'd been diagnosed with stage 1B, which is a slightly odd, the way they stage cervical cancer is slightly different to other cancers. It would be classed as a stage 3 in any other type of cancer, because I had quite a lot of spread to my lymph nodes. And my mum had kind of not really discussed much about her breast cancer first time round. She just described it as a spot of bother, and she didn't really elaborate on that too much. So it was a bit of a shock when we discovered it had spread to her liver. And, you know, I knew what that meant. I had enough training at that point to know that that was really bad news. So I looked around for things to help her, but I'll just go back again. I'm sort of jumping, sorry. So I was looking around for things to help her. I found out that IGF-1 was implicated, that glucose was implicated, and I started to encourage her to change her diet, to do different things. She wouldn't listen to that because she was listening to her doctor, who told her not to bother with any of that kind of thing. So unfortunately, she only lasted a matter of weeks, actually, and she never had the chemo radiotherapy, actually, even after her first diagnosis. They didn't give her anything. They just did a little lumpectomy, gave her tamoxifen, and that was all. So she didn't really, I don't think, have the best treatment all the way through. Me, I kind of full of grief for the loss of my kids and loss of my mum as well. I was really in a very sorry way, and hugely depressed. But I kind of try to pick myself up and find reasons to live again. And sailing was one of my passions. And this is me sailing with my my then boyfriend Andrew. I also did some rather more exciting sailing. This is me in West Key, and this was doing a regatta with some Russians, actually. My friend Ian is somewhere under there, deep underwater. He went swimming on that occasion, and I know that the iRise is all about going out there, getting adventure, and sort of pushing you to do things that you're not normally used to doing, which I love. And this is kind of, you know, this was quite an experience for me, but I absolutely loved the whole concept of getting back out there and getting thrown into an activity and trying to take my mind off everything that was happening beyond cancer. So I was talking about my mother, but in 1999, I was then diagnosed with stage 4. It had spread to my lungs, and within a week, we'd got married. By the Wednesday of the following week, we realized it just in my lungs. It hadn't spread anywhere else, thank God. And I was already engaged. So I said, look, let's just get married. And I managed to get the registry office down the road to agree to have us in on the Saturday. I played the terminal ill card, and they squeezed me in. And I then realized that we aren't limited by the science. This is something that was put forward by Dr. Vincent DeVita, who's former director of the NCI. He's written a book called The Death of Cancer, but he realized that we're not limited by the science. We're limited to make use of the information and treatments we already have, and that too often lives are tragically ended not by cancer, but by the bureaucracy that came with the nation's investment in the war on cancer, by review boards, the FDA, by doctors who won't stand by their patients or who are afraid to take a chance. And I kind of realized that the doctors were very limited in what they were offering. They didn't offer any kind of complementary treatment. I'd already learned a little bit about Wahlberg's approach, the fact that, you know, glucose and this glycolysis was a major factor. And I kind of got it in my head that starving cancer would be a really useful way to try and stop the growth of cancer. But in the meantime, whilst I was diagnosed with this stage 4, the first thing I did was sit down, and I used this spot of bother kind of as a way to try and work out what I needed to do. Now, this is kind of an overview of some of the things that I did, and to begin with. So obviously I had the chemo and the radiotherapy, and the surgery. These are standard treatments, but I definitely put in exercise into my program. Intravenous vitamin C, I then added after my chemo and my radiotherapy. And then I also checked, I had my integrative oncologist check my micronutrients to see whether I was missing anything. I was very low on folate and certain omega fatty acids. And I also found something called berberine, which we'll discuss later. Hormone modulation. My cancer wasn't allegedly hormonally driven, but I still added indole 3-carbinol, took melatonin, you know, lots of things to help modulate the estrogen. Relaxation, stress management, really important. And I did hypnosis. I had spiritual guidance, and I had all sorts of different relaxation and meditation approaches. Pancreatic enzymes is something I also took. I think that can help your immune system to try and break down. You have some fibrin around some of these tumor-associated macrophages. And if you break that down, that can actually assist your immune system to try and fight your cancer. My cancer I knew was HPV driven, and some of the breast cancers are very driven by viruses as well. So it might be worth looking into acyclovir, which is something you can get. You have to pretend you've got herpes, but you can get that online, and that might be a useful addition for some of the breast cancers. Other immune boosters like beta glucans, things like that. AHCC, things like that I also added in. Gut health, I had all of that assessed by my integrative oncologist. He sent off to what was then known as the Smoky Lab, but I think it's now called, can't remember. But anyway, there are some very good institutions that can look at your gut health, can look at the microbiome and make sure that you've got a sufficient number of lacto and bifidobacteria. Detox, I did try the coffee enemas. I didn't do many of them. I do worry that if you have liver mets and you're creating glutathione in the area of the mets, then you may actually be helping to stimulate it. So I think detox and actually assisting the liver is fine as long as you don't have those liver mets. That's my personal view. Thyroid function all seems to be very linked in actually also to breast cancer. And I had seaweed to try and boost my iodine. Some of you will actually take a little bit of iodine. You have to make sure that you're not overdoing it. You can actually get toxic from too much iodine. So please have your iodine levels checked. Angiogenesis inhibitors, things like green tea, really important. I added a lot. I drank green tea like it was going out of fashion. I actually still don't like green tea particularly, but I've continued to drink it because I just know how critical it is. And COX-2 inhibitors, I knew that I had inflammation driving my cancer. Inflammation will drive every cancer. So I was taking aspirin, and I took omega-3 oils as well. And these are really critical. Aspirin is very useful for breast cancer. I had an anti-inflammatory diet. I didn't test my gut for what I was maybe a little bit reactive to, but you can get little tests to just see whether you get IgG inflammation, and it's well worth doing that just to see if you have any reaction to particular food types. I definitely did a low IGF-1 and actually IGF-2 can also be very strongly driven for breast cancer. Low dairy protein, low saturated fat as well. Saturated fat is strongly linked to breast cancer. A low fat diet is really critical. And then obviously the low GI and high fiber diet as well. So it wasn't until 2003 that I thought I was doing okay. I was a little bit panicked to begin with, but I was surviving. I didn't do anything out of, I did all the complementary things at this point, but I didn't look at off-label drugs until 2003. And that's when I started to get problems with my blood. Now, this is normal blood. In 2002, it had started to look a bit like that. This is called rouleau, and this is where your red blood cells all stack together, and that means that they're not getting through your capillaries properly. They don't pick up oxygen properly. You're not oxygenating your blood, and lack of oxygen is really linked to driving further cancer. It then ended up being a right old mess. I had dysplasia, myelodysplasia, where this is a precursor to it. It got worse than that. I also had this deleted P53 in my blood, raised TM2PK, which meant that I had aerobic glycolysis happening. I had MMP2 levels were raised. frankly, I was, again, a mess, and I was really worried. I didn't even tell my husband at this point. He was doing a lot of traveling abroad, and I thought I wouldn't really worry him too much at this point. But this is when I started to look at adding these off-label drugs. And by 2005, this is another shot of my blood. Nice and normal again after that horrific last night. And this is a white blood cell, nice and active, actually going back to sort of trying to scavenge and pick up lots of nasty stuff. So by 2003, I kind of worked out that I needed to take this cocktail. Now, my particular cocktail included dipridamole, which is an antiplatelet drug, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. The one I chose was something called etodolac. I took a statin. It's this one is a lipophilic, so it's a fat-loving statin. These seem to be the more beneficial statins, particularly for cancer and for breast cancer. I took lots of omega-3. I think the type of oil you take is really critical. And then obviously I did a low GI diet, and I also took the intravenous vitamin C. And by 2004, actually it had come back again. I kind of lost the plot a little bit, and I'd forgotten about the berberine, which I'd initially discovered, and I'd forgotten again, but I added that back in 2004 because I had another recurrence. I could see my markers going off the scale again, and at that point it all disappeared, and I kind of have been stable since. Oncologists, unfortunately, have a view that stage 4 is incurable. They have this idea that, you know, you can have, and this is kind of the line of treatment that they give you initially. Certainly in the NHS, they offer you chemo because that's the cheapest option first. If you're lucky, I think in the States, you may be offered some of the more expensive drugs and maybe Keytruda and things like that first. But we don't tend to do that in the UK. We give the cheap stuff first. And if you kind of qualify, you then get further and further up the line. I had stage 4. And I'm still alive. So the reason I did that, and I'm different to many other stage 4 cancer patients, is because I changed my diet. I took some really key supplements. I added a lot of exercise into my protocol, and also I took these off-label drugs as well. And those are kind of like my 4 pillars. So cancer cells are really addicted to nutrients, and when they can't consume enough, they just wither and die. This is a really key part of what I say in my book. It is absolutely essential for you to grasp that as something really important, because you want to starve those cancer cells. If they can't get enough, they just wither and die. So again, this is my 4 pillars. You've got diet, exercise, supplements, and off-label drugs, and frankly they're all fairly, you know, they're as important as each other. So please, I know a lot of people don't do enough exercise, and I know it's hard to try and put that in your lifestyle, but I love the fact that iRise are sort of pushing that and making sure that younger women with breast cancer are really doing that, because it really is a critical part of your protocol. Aspirin is also something really useful for breast cancer, and they found that after 6.5 years, it reduced distant metastases by 36%, and perioperatively, so if you give it before and after for breast cancer, you can really have a massive reduction, up to 70% reduction, particularly if you're having a stronger non-steroidal, not just aspirin, but actually if you have something like etodolac, you get this enormous reduction in the chance of metastasis. And this is where we have a major opportunity to change the statistics of breast cancer and other cancers if we just looked at the perioperative period a little bit better, and were a little bit more, if oncologists were a little bolder with prescribing things both pre and post-op, we could seriously affect the survival statistics. For me, I did loads of research. I didn't have Google. I didn't have all of these things that, you know, Facebook, none of that, no webinars like this. I just had to sort of look around in libraries and get journals and things. This is one of the journals that I subscribe to, the Townsend Letter. And in there, I read about dipridamole, this antiplatelet drug. And I knew that platelets were seriously involved in increasing the metastatic potential, and just by increasing the stickiness of the blood, and that just increases the platelet-derived growth factor. And that was something I really wanted to target. So that was one of the big reasons I wanted to have it into my protocol. The other reason was because it's a nucleoside transport inhibitor. Nucleosides are little chunks of DNA. So this is a nucleotide here. So it's just one of the bases of the DNA structure. That's your double helix here. It's just a tiny little chunk of it. And what happens with chemo is you get a breakdown of the DNA in the area. You get a destruction of all the cells. You get all these things just lying around as debris in the area. And then cancer learns to scoop that up. It has a process called autophagy, where it learns to scoop up all this debris. And I knew that stopping the cancer from being able to scoop up the debris was kind of important. So dipridamole is shown to be incredibly useful in combination with chemotherapy as well. So this was me feeling like Alice in Wonderland. I'd found all these drugs, and they effectively just said, drink me. So that's why I took the lot. And I knew that combinations are really important. This is a graph I have in my book, and it shows the difference between carmustine and berberine. This is for brain cancer. It's got nothing to do with breast cancer, because every cancer behaves slightly differently. And particularly for brain cancer, berberine is very useful. This is carmustine on its own. This is berberine on its own, which has almost double the effect of carmustine. But actually it has, when you add them together, you get this synergistic effect and you kill even more cells. This is not just the stem cell, this is getting the fast dividing cell as well. It's important to know it's not just targeting the cancer stem cell, although that is critical, because that's the reason we don't get this. Carmustine is only targeting the fast dividing cell here. It's not getting the cancer stem cell. This is kind of getting both, but also the fast dividing cell as well. So the reason I started taking the lovastatin was because I found this trial that had been looking at both head and neck and cervical cancers, and they had recognized that some of these patients had they'd been able to get long-term stable disease. And at the time, I was just looking for stability. I wasn't looking to get rid of my cancer. I didn't know that I would. All I wanted to do was just cling on to life. So I thought if the lovastatin could kind of give me that extra few months, great, I was going to add it in. So I took the lovastatin, I took the dipridamole. And in fact, actually, it was I was very lucky because my oncologist had been looking into statins, and she didn't know which one to prescribe for me. I went to her, and she wasn't going to prescribe me anything. I mean, she'd never done it with any of her patients. But I went to her and I said, look, I found this information about the combination of lovastatin and etodolac together. I think they're really good. I'd seen that in another journal called Life Extension Foundation. And I'd gone to her and I kind of begged her to prescribe them for me. And back in 2003, oncologists weren't quite as restricted by protocols, and they didn't have the same level of legal problems that they do now. They don't get sent in front of the GMC quite as easily. It's not quite as strict as it is now. So she prescribed me the lovastatin, she prescribed the etodolac, wow, I'm still here, thank God. But statins are really, really important for breast cancer because you have elevated cholesterol. It's a risk factor for every type of breast cancer. And cancer cells use the mevelinate pathway very strongly. But breast cancer cells do differ in their individual statin sensitivity. So triple negative breast cancers are the most receptive. So you get a strong response with atorvastatin and simvastatin, which are other lipophilic type of statins. But you don't get so much with the other hormone-dependent hormone-dependent breast cancers. So you also get this accumulation of something called SREB-P2. And this was something that I discovered as well. I read an article by this lady, Pandrya and Linda Penn, and they had done some research looking at both dipridamole and looking at statins together. And bingo, this was kind of like what I needed to find as well. And this is why this is my Metro map. This is a more up-to-date version of the one you've seen in my book. But down on the right here, you've got the Mevelinate pathway, and this is effectively the cholesterol section, bottom right here. So the statins will help to stop the Mevelinate pathway, and SREB-P2 can be stopped by dipridamole. So that's why together they are really a very potent combination, particularly for breast cancer. But there are other supplements that can help with that, like luteolin as well. Now, somebody else who's used dipridamole, I don't know if you recognize who's in this picture. Now, on the left is actually a friend of mine called Johan Brunel. He's actually dad of one of my son's friends. And he was a yellow jersey winner back in the 80s. And he ended up being Lance Armstrong's trainer. So that's Lance Armstrong on the right. Now, you probably know he survived terminal cancer and then went on to win 7 Tour de France. Now, one of the things that he did, and a lot of the drugs that they used back in the 80s, one of them was dipridamole. Now, I'm just supposing that this may be one of the reasons why he also survived, because he added this in order to get himself back from chemo and actually getting himself training really quickly. And what they took were these drugs to help, they're called EPOs, which stimulate extra red blood cells to be produced in the system, and this kind of clogs up your system a little bit if you're not careful. So the dipridamole was an antiplatelet drug to stop your red blood cells and your platelets all sticking together and keep it flowing and keep the oxygen going around the system. So all the cyclists back in the 80s were taking these drugs. It wasn't just him. Johan has told me that pretty much everybody was cheating. He took this combination. He also took aspirin as well. And I've had it from the horse's mouth from Johan, who was his trainer, that actually dipridamole was part of what he did. So possibly this may be one of the big reasons why Lance actually survived as well. Now, these are my marker levels. So I'll just go through what happened with me. This is when I was diagnosed stage 4. Initially, my markers were about 200. I took the aspirin before surgery, and post-surgery, this is what happens. It happens to every single cancer patient. Your markers just shoot up through the roof. There's nothing you can do about it apart from try and make sure that as you have these cancer stem cells, there's always going to be spillage. There's always going to be problems with surgery. You need to make sure that it doesn't stick afterwards. So that's why I think you've got to stop aspirin a little bit before surgery. You don't want to be bleeding on the surgical table. You need to make sure that you stop at least 3 days before surgery. But after surgery, in fact, actually, there's another drug called cimetidine, which I took later on, but that can really help post-surgery as well. And also propranolol, which is another drug. I discuss this. I've got an online course I discuss. I've got a little video on pre and post-op surgery. But for me, this is what I did. So post the chemo, I was using berberine particularly, and some other things like gymnema, and has green tea, etc. So a lot of that stuff really helped plummet in fact, my oncologist was super amazed at how quickly, and I just dropped down below. This is the normal range here. So she didn't expect it to come down this far. She was expecting me to bounce around as sort of about here, you know, the 400 level. But I dropped it way back down under 150 after just my first dose, and she'd never seen that before. So she was gobsmacked by that. And I had obviously changed my diet quite considerably at that point. And then this is this is post chemo. I then had 2000, I was having berberine, aspirin, I was doing the intravenous vitamin C, and this actually dropped my markers down to the lowest level they ever got. In fact, they dropped down to 40. I was really delighted by that. But then, unfortunately, they started to rise again. And this is when I took the dipridamole. That dropped them down to this level, but that wasn't enough. I then ended up taking the lovastatin, etodolac, and the omega-3, because this was the other markers that were going on. This is the TM2PK, which was a marker for what was going on in my blood, which was this other cancer that was a problem in the background. So that's you know, the actual normal range is actually way down here. It's 15. That's the normal range. So I was well above. I was about nearly 400. But that dropped me right down. And then, unfortunately, this is when I'd gone off the rails the following year after I got better, and went on holiday, drank a lot of Guinness, which is full of iron, and kind of went off the rails a little bit with my diet, and that didn't do me any favors. But I was taking my markers very regularly, and so I could see that I was going off the cliff again. So I then took my combination, which I'd only taken for about 3 months in 2003. So I took it I then stuck on it for much longer. And then by 2006, I'd come across more information about metformin, cimetidine. I added those into as well to my protocol. And since then, my markers have just gradually come down. So between 2004, after the second kind of myelodysplasia, I then tried to get other patients to get on board with these off-label drugs. I felt that, you know, this was information I needed to share with other people, but I couldn't get any other patient to get these prescribed. I was really struggling. So it was absolutely wonderful to find the Care Oncology Clinic in 2015. I read about them in the Daily Telegraph, and they were doing a very similar cocktail to mine. Theirs includes, so they use atorvastatin, and they use doxycycline, they use metformin, and they use an anti-worming drug called mebendazole. But also in the Telegraph, I read about this chap, Professor Ben Williams, who had cured his brain cancer, GBM. He'd use Accutane, which hits a pathway called PIN1, verapamil, which targets the multi-drug resistance, so it helps to pump out and keep out. It stops you have something called efflux pumps in your cancer cells that help pump out cancer drugs, and actually creates resistance. And verapamil will help to hold the cancer drugs inside whilst it's dividing. So it helps with chemo. And in fact, berberine does the same thing. It helps to keep the chemo inside the cell while it's dividing. And he took a very high level of tamoxifen. Now, breast cancer is not the only cancer that is driven by estrogen. Brain cancers are as well. So he took a very high level of that as well. And he's been free of cancer since. Unfortunately, he had a stroke a few years ago. I was going to do a talk with him in America, but sadly that didn't happen. And PIN1 is something that I have, since I published my book first time, I've recognized that PIN1 is really very critical for breast cancer. And it really does affect several cellular proteins, and it's overexpressed in the majority of human breast cancers. So it's a really important target. And how do you target that? This is it on my, so it's more on the glutamine side, on the protein side of my map. If you're not familiar with my Metro map, just to briefly explain, this is the glucose side, this is the protein, fatty acids, and these are targets that will just attack each side. It's a very basic, simplistic version of how to starve cancer. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I've just tried to simplify it. And PIN1 is now very firmly on my glutamine side to try and help you breast cancer ladies. And if you look up ATRA, which is a type of vitamin A, and arsenic trioxide, that sounds pretty awful, but it is a type of chemo. And if you have it for triple negative breast cancer, they are showing, look up this research, because that actually shows really good effects for triple negative breast cancer. But a natural form of stopping the PIN1, you've got EGCG, again, that's the extract from green tea. It has so many different effects, but I would also add juglone or black walnut into your protocol as well if you have breast cancer. I think this is a really important pathway to be blocking. So when I'd had cancer, I had this basic vision, very basic vision of starving cancer. So this is the carbohydrate, and what I'd use is the metformin and berberine to block the glucose. I'd use a statin to help block the fat, and I'd use dipridamole to kind of stop these nucleosides being reabsorbed. But I also had this theory that it was a bit like, so when you have stage 4, it's a bit like the fire of London. You know, stage 1 is like a house fire. Stage 4 is runaway, and the only way to try and stop it is to create fire breaks. And this is how they stopped the fire of London in whenever it was, 1066, I think it was. Anyway, they used buckets of water from the Thames to start with. That didn't work. And then they used explosives to try and knock down the houses between the fires. And that actually eventually stopped it. And this is how we kind of need to look at stopping the spread of breast cancer. So there are important drugs and supplements that will stop something called these matrix metalloproteases. And these are enzymes that break down around the outside of the cancer and allow the cancer to break off and spread. And in breast cancer, you actually have quite a few of these upregulated, so they're overexpressed. Xanthahumol is quite a useful MMP1 inhibitor, and you'll find that is overexpressed in most breast cancers. MMP2, really important to block that. Mebendazole and, in fact, doxycycline will help block that. MMP3, again, glucosamine sulfate, really important for most breast cancers. MMP9 and MMP13 also. So dipridamole also has this MMP9 inhibiting effect, as does the doxycycline, which is one of the drugs that the Care Oncology prescribe. And then MMP13, the catalpol and cyclosaponin, is particularly good for triple negative breast cancer. So this is kind of like my overall theory of what's going on between the genetics and the metabolism. Now, the oncologists are still very much fixated about the genetics, and there are key genetic transformations that happen, and particularly things like the PIK3CA in breast cancer, where you could have a BRCA mutation, or the P53 could be mutated, and all of these are kind of key. And they will actually drive metabolic changes. And this is kind of what you don't see, which is the underground system. The metabolic changes are less than you can have thousands of genetic changes, but actually the metabolic changes, you have relatively few. And I kind of call it like my Piccadilly Circus theory, because in order to get to Piccadilly Circus, if you block one route, it just goes round and comes back in a different route. And that's kind of how cancer works. And this was why I started up my theory, which then led to sort of building up different pathways on different sides of the map, until I ended up with this, which is pretty much very familiar to you in my 2008 book. That's assuming you have it. And this is now going to be the one that I'll put in my update, which will come out at some point this year. I haven't actually fixed the date. I keep on learning new stuff and wanting to put new stuff in. So this is including the PIN1, including more transporters as well, both glutamine transport, the lactate transport, and fat transport I've also added in. And these are all quite key targets for you. So in order to get the correct cocktail, you've got to think about the synergy. There's no point having lots of things that just block the one pathway. You need to have ones that block different pathways. And the drugs that you choose should be what's known as pleiotropic. In other words, they have multiple effects. They don't just attack one thing. They actually have effects on maybe your MMPs, as well as your maybe some cell signaling at the beginning, and maybe some of these other maybe multiple metabolic pathways. And they obviously have to have a good safety profile. I broke down the hallmarks of cancer into kind of 5 key areas, because if you look at Hanahan and Weinberg, it's kind of like they have this circle, and there's no start, there's no finish. I tried to make sure that people knew how it started and how it ended up being the fast cell division at the end. So you get this abnormal cell signaling leading to, oops, that's corrupted a little bit, but my abnormal cell metabolism. This is the metro map. You then get these abnormal growth factors, the VEGF, the vascular endothelial growth factor, which can be stopped by aspirin very effectively, the platelet-derived growth factor, which can be stopped by dipridamol, and all of these MMPs as well. And once those are secreted and you get this secretion of lactic acid, it then switches off the immune system. And then you get this imbalance of the immune system. And once the immune system is suppressed, you then get the fast dividing cell. And this is kind of, this is the focus at the moment of oncology. They just give you the chemotherapy, they give you the targeted drugs. Some of that will affect things like the HER2 at the beginning here, but mostly they are focusing on just fast cell division, and they don't really focus enough on the metabolism. Growth factors, sometimes you get given Avastin, but there needs to be more of an approach. All of this is kind of like the stem cell, and it's only when it gets to this bit that it really takes off. So my approach is really to use the starve and a kill phase. I've kind of divided it up into two so that you normalize the cell signaling, you then starve the cancer, you block the metastasis by blocking these growth factors, and then you use a pulse or a kill phase to try and create apoptosis. And this is using anything that's going to raise the free radicals in the cell. You can do that either with intravenous vitamin C, or you can use, I use non-steroidal, the etodolac and statin together, low-dose chemo and oxygen therapies as well. So very briefly, just go back to my life from 2004. Desperate to have children. I was absolutely devastated by the loss of my fertility. And I know that many of you go through fertility loss as well. With you may have to stop ovarian function and things like that. So we sought out surrogates, and I also had a friend who was an egg donor, and we spent a huge amount of money and got nowhere at all. And then I came across Tabitha, who very kindly offered just sort of, to do straight surrogacy, which we hadn't tried up until that point. But unfortunately, we had 3 miscarriages, so that was really devastating. But she didn't quit. Like me, she wasn't going to quit, so she had one last go. And then in 2006, we had Jamie, and then little Sam in 2009. And since then, we've, I've continued my mission. I'm still trying to get people to know about off-label drugs. I started up my Facebook group. If you're not a member, please look it up and join. I have lots of doctors on there as well. On there, you can see Akbar Khan. That's George Yu. And we've got Gregory Riggins on the right here, who's the sort of mebendazole guru. This guy, Akbar Khan, is the DCA guru. So I have quite a lot of experts on my site as well. I've also started up this online course for people to take as well. And if you want more information about any of that, please visit my website. And I'm sure Gillian will probably fill you in with lots more info as well. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. There's cancer is hugely complex. I'm sure some of you have read my book and got lots of questions for me. So I'll hand you back to Gillian.
Oh, thanks, Jane. That's what a wonderful presentation. I can certainly relate to how you felt when you were first diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, of just feeling like you want to find a way to just hold on. And I really, really, my heart, I have a deep affection for you and everything you've shared, because since I have started on, when I first discovered your book, How to Starve Cancer, and then really started investigating a lot that is included in that book, and got in touch with Cancer Care Oncology and started on a whole regimen of off-label drugs and targeted supplements, as well as my, changes in my diet and exercise. It has had such a significant impact on my well-being from the perspective of my cancer. You know, I'm in complete remission at the moment. Yay.
Brilliant.
And it gives me hope for the future. And so by having you come and speak today, I feel like it's sharing an opportunity for our community to start to empower themselves with this information so that they can find ways to thrive moving forward. So to that end, I'll read off some of the questions that I guess just go in order. Is that maybe the best way to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. There's a whole bunch here. Whole bunch. Okay. We'll start with the first one. What is a good supplement for hair growth after chemotherapy? What supplement is good for the symptoms of menopause, such as insomnia, vaginal dryness, etc.?
Well, personally, I have estriol cream. So it's not estradiol, it's the weaker form of estrogen, which is topical. You can use that, you know, for vaginal dryness. And I find that incredibly useful. And I would not be scared of the estriol. It is a very weak estrogen. And in fact, it has been shown to be protective rather than a driver. And in fact, actually, I use a little bit on my widow's peak here as well. So, and around my eyes, wrinkle protection. I think it's very useful for all of that. So it doesn't get used just down below, it gets used elsewhere as well. So that would be something that I would suggest you maybe have a go at. I don't know whether it works or not, but certainly, you know, a lack of hormones is really a big issue for a lot of people.
And we covered a lot of that in our February webinar on sexual health, which we'll make sure to put the links on our website for the recorded webinars from the past so that everybody has access. But Dr. Dawn Dizon spoke specifically about ways to address those things.
Oh, great.
So look for that in the next couple of days. We'll make sure to add those links. I realize those are probably maybe not on there. And let me look, let's keep going. What is your opinion on the mistletoe for therapy to treat triple positive breast cancer?
I don't know specifically about triple positive breast cancer and mistletoe, but I know that it has huge effects on the immune system, and generally it can increase survival quite significantly, and it does boost, is specifically really good for the immune system. So, but I think in order to get your immune system working, you have to get in the right place for it to really work properly. And that's where you need to be blocking a lot of those growth factors first in order to create a situation where the immune system can start to work. I think very often trying to use some of the immunotherapies before you've actually targeted the growth factors is kind of like wasting your time. You're trying to do something against a brick wall. You know, you need to actually reduce the resistance of the cancer by blocking those growth factors in order to allow the immune system to work a little better. I describe that more. I've got a whole immune module in my course, which I've learned a lot actually doing my online course. It's been a good eye-opener for me actually to really increase my knowledge on all of that side of things. But mistletoe, I don't mention it very much. I haven't mentioned it much in my first book, but it will be mentioned in my update when I finally publish that.
Great. So the next question follow-up is, you recommend low GI and low fat, which to the reader means low carbs and low fatty acids. Is this a correct interpretation? If so, your protein percent would be higher, wouldn't it?
But protein actually is potential issue as well. You've got to be, in fact, I'm not suggesting you have a high protein diet, because specifically for breast cancer, asparaginase, or asparagine rather, is actually quite implicated with breast cancer. It's very similar to glutamine, and a low asparagine diet can be very useful. They've shown specifically for triple negative, but also other breast cancers do much better when they go on a low asparagine diet. And you can look that up. There are articles on that, but it is essentially very much a sort of a veg and fruit diet. But again, be very careful about too many fruits, because you don't want to be spiking your glucose levels too high. So yeah, just you can have lower amounts of protein. Intermittent fasting, I think, is one of the best things you can do for any cancer, really. And it means that you can have maybe a little bit more protein, but as long as you're having a small window when you're eating, then you have that break where the cancer cannot feed on it, and it weakens it. So it's all about weakening and making it more vulnerable to other targeted treatments and other therapies that you're using.
Okay. The next question is, which statins are good for triple negative breast cancer? You may have addressed this already.
Yeah, so any of the lipophilic statins, particularly atorvastatin and simvastatin, but it depends. If you have a big cocktail of things that you're taking, and you probably will, if you can't look at my protocol, you end up with quite a few things. And dipridamole is particularly good for triple negative as well, in combination with the statin. And it shows that it stops progression of triple negative. But for stopping with the statins, you need to have a lipophilic statin, so atorvastatin or simvastatin. But the simvastatin has more interaction with other drugs because it affects the liver enzymes a little bit more. Atorvastatin actually has a longer half-life, so you don't have to, simvastatin I think is actually only 12 hours, and atorvastatin is 24, so you only need to take it sort of once a day. So those are key differences between them. But for the immune system, actually, I think maybe the simvastatin may be better.
Okay, I'll go to the next question. After breast cancer and acute myeloid leukemia 15 years later, of course, I am concerned about a third occurrence of cancer. I am in complete remission from both, but wanting to do everything I can to starve cancer. Where would you start to plan supplements, and what tests would you request from an oncologist?
Well, ideally, the problem with cancer is a combination of genetic factors, it's a combination of dietary and metabolic factors, it's a combination of abnormal cell signaling. So there are certain key mutations that I would love every cancer patient to be tested for. Things like the P53, the BRCA, obviously you'll get tested for, but why aren't we testing the MYC? Why aren't we testing, that's MYC? Why aren't we testing the PIK3CA? These are key mutations that can occur. In fact, the PIK3CA is really, if you have that going on, or a P10 mutation, those can actually drive the metabolic changes as well. It can drive glycolysis, it can drive the fat pathways, and you can kind of work out what you need a bit more if you have those tested. It would be worth cancer patients actually starting to beat the drum and say, I need these tested, because it would really help to focus on what therapies would be more useful. So that's one thing you need to do, is sort of kind of work out the genetics, but you really have to kind of battle to get that tested, and you have to have that done on the original tumor. So, there's no point just having it done in your blood. You actually need to have the tumor itself tested for some of these things to find out what's mutated. So what was the rest of the question? I can't remember.
Where would you start to plan supplements?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is a tricky one. Cancer is a long, complicated set of changes in the body, and you need to kind of, starving cancer is kind of the key. If you can starve the cancer, you can then buy yourself time. You can. So I would always start with starving it, because then you really are creating a window of opportunity to do other things. You know, you can stop the growth, you can stop it from continuing to spread, and then work on growth factors as well. But I would always start with kind of my metro map as the key, and then either side, you know, you've got other things that you need to be looking at as well, the HER2, etc., if you are positive for that. And I've got a whole list of supplements and things that are useful for that. I've done many videos in my online course, so I go through all of that in my online course, and you can do your own research. You can stop the videos and then go and research and have a look for yourself and find out what's suitable for you once you know the pathways. And I kind of specify what those are in my online course as well. I try and be a little bit more cancer specific with every single pathway. So I try and highlight where the breast cancer is, and even triple negative, I try and highlight where those pathways are.
Jean, I found that just to add to this, when I contacted Cancer Care Oncology and set up a consultation, I found it extremely useful. They were very knowledgeable. And when I decided to move forward and, you know, they wanted to review all of my existing medical records, and they really helped me to sort of to dive deeper into maybe answering some of these questions that this attendee has put forth. And that might be one potential
Absolutely.
solution.
They're great, you know, and I always will continue to champion them, because they do have more of a knowledge than people realize. I know it looks like they are only giving the 4 drugs and they don't give beyond that, but that's because they're doing a study on those and they're kind of bound by the limits of that study. But they do have a good general knowledge of some of the supplements as well, although they may pass you on to other people to sort of discuss that in more depth.
I'll move to the next question. The question is, I might have missed it, but how much omega-3 did you take daily?
Quite a lot, actually. And I think in order to block the sort of uptake of bad fat, you need to sort of increase the omega-3. And I was taking 3 grams so 3 like chunky pills every meal. So I took 9 grams a day. So quite a lot. And I know most people kind of only take 1. And it really, and particularly for breast cancer, I just don't think that's enough. I think you actually really need to push quite high levels of omega-3, don't you? So.
And the next question is, I'm on palbociclib combo. As this is ongoing, when would the kill phase start?
You could probably do intravenous vitamin C alongside that. I'm not an expert on when to put that in, and this is something you need to decide with your oncologist or your integrative oncologist or whoever you can talk to about this. I think it is something, you may not need it, that's the thing. I mean, some people do very well without having to put a kill phase, you know, proper sort of free radical burst into their protocol, and they can just starve away their cancer. It's a slower process, but the kill phase isn't always necessary. I mean, people seem to think it is, but it isn't. You know, you can kill off cancer by doing a slower approach, just by starving it. You don't have to do the kill phase. It's not always necessary to put that in. It depends. If you've got stability, you may be fine without, you know, and if you've got a more of aggressive cancer and it's starting to grow, then yes, think about putting a kill phase in, and trying to add maybe intravenous vitamin C. I'm now heading towards ferroptosis as a sort of a way to use vitamin C in a more effective way. Again, that would be a whole new session that we could talk about that one. But that's using artemisinin and using special ways to kind of stop the cysteine accumulation in the cell, to drop down the glutathione and create a much bigger kill effect with the intravenous vitamin C.
We have a few more questions. Question is, any recommendations for BRCA positive carriers?
Yeah, BRCA kind of stimulates more glycolysis. So I would suggest definitely adding more of the maybe you might even have to try more of a ketogenic diet if you don't have to go too extreme, but certainly, you know, really low GI with a BRCA1, and you might, you know, I've got a you might want to add more melatonin, maybe even try that during the day, because that helps to block a lot of the some of these glycolytic enzymes. Fermented wheat germ, for example, if you have a BRCA1, fermented wheat germ is really quite useful. That helps block quite a lot of the glycolytic enzymes. So that might be something to look at adding. Maybe even DCA as well.
Okay, there's another question. In order to target all the pathways, the list of drugs is extensive. What do you recommend for people with liver mets who may not be able to cope processing so many drugs alongside chemotherapy?
Yeah, well, I've kind of said the more advanced you are, the more you might need to target, but that's not necessarily true. You need to find really good combinations. So you may only need to block about 3 pathways, but if you do them really well, you can help put the blockers on. So I kind of threw it out there that the more aggressive, the more you need to block. But actually, if you are doing a really good job of just blocking 2 or 3, you may get a really good synergistic effect where you don't need to take a huge number. But if you have liver mets, one of the best things is the intermittent fasting. That is really good. And that is something I would strongly recommend. And also exercise. It is phenomenal. You know, you need to work on that. And in fact, actually, intense exercise can be quite a strong kind of kill phase because it's raising those free radicals. So it can actually be really useful in helping to kill off more aggressive cancers. So that the more aggressive the cancer, the more you need to exercise, the more you need to do intermittent fasting. And that's time restricted feeding. I don't mean fasting for days on end. I think if you're doing the core, kind of like the core care oncology stuff, you don't need to be fasting for long periods. You know, I think it's important to realize that maybe a maximum of, if you're going to do time restricted feeding over a couple of days, which is different to doing it on a daily basis, you need to look at not being too aggressive with your intermittent fasting in that respect. I think you can stimulate more autophagy, particularly if it's gone to the liver. I think you need to be a little bit careful about making it more aggressive in the long term.
And I would just like to add, Jane, that everybody who's signed up for this webinar, I will follow up with an email encouraging everyone to look at a program that iRise Above is offering starting March 29th. And it's a 12-week online program. It's a wellness training program that integrates exercise, nutrition, and support from your community. Those that start the program join together as a closed community to offer support and encouragement with one another. But we have an excellent fitness trainer that works individually with each woman. Everybody has an app they download on their phone. They get daily workouts. They get access to various types of yoga that's pre-recorded or live. There's some live fitness workouts. It's really wonderful. And there's also a physician that offers guidance in terms of nutrition. It's a lot of fun too, just to be part of that community. So look for that. I'll follow up with that after this for those who might be interested in joining us at the end of this month.
Sounds brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. There's a whole lot in here, and I'm just sort of trying to go through a little bit here. Somebody asked one question here, and I think we've addressed it with cancer care oncology. Is it seems there are differences in protocols between UK and US, and I will add Canada as well. I was born in Canada. I live in the United States. What advice does Jane have to find an oncologist willing to prescribe off-label drugs in the US? And I think we've sort of mentioned it a lot here,
Yeah.
but
I do have other doctors on my website as well. So if you are struggling and you maybe want to increase, maybe add dipridamol or something like that into your cocktail, or discuss it at least with somebody. If you go to How to Starve Cancer, I do have a list of other doctors who are au fait with my book. So hopefully they're more amenable to adding these things in. And particularly down in Florida, got Mark Rosenberg and Daniel Thomas as well, Dr. Daniel Thomas. They're both excellent. And they'll Skype, I think, anywhere.
That's great to know. Okay, we have a question regarding biomarkers. Assume this is through blood draws. How frequently do you, Jane, recommend assessing biomarkers?
I think that really depends on the aggressiveness of your disease. If you think, I was doing it about every 3 to 4 weeks when I was really going through, when it was in the acute phase, when it came back. And certainly for about 2 years, I looked at, I did it regularly. And then it eased off after that. I didn't do them quite so regularly after that. But certainly I think it's well worth tracking them quite closely. They can go, they may not correlate to begin with. Once you start on the care oncology program or any of this stuff, they become more reliable in terms of what they are actually, the information that you get back, because you're actually stabilizing the disease with these drugs and these supplements. The reliability of the cancer markers do improve, and you can see, you generally see the markers drop down quite considerably, so you can then track them a lot easier. But certainly 3 or 4 weeks, I think, in the acute phase would be what I would do in somebody else's shoes, and that's what I did.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. One, the question here is, can you talk a little more about oxygen therapy? Is there a supplement or diet that works synergistically with this?
There are several intravenous vitamin C, for example, will produce hydrogen peroxide in the area of the cancer. So that's one of the best things you can do. And it's highly targeted, because it gets attracted to and breaks down with hydrogen peroxide where there is less catalase. It doesn't have the catalase to sort of neutralize it. So it becomes a very targeted kind of drug. And you can make it much more effective by using artemisinin, which again creates more oxygen release because of the reaction with the iron inside the cell. So that's a really effective way of actually using to try and raise the free radicals. And even just exercising with an oxygen concentrator can be really useful. And you can do that immediately after your intravenous vitamin C. That can be really powerful. Some people use hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and that's useful. There are quite, and ozone. I actually had ozone infusions, which can be given at the same time as intravenous vitamin C. So there are a few options.
Okay. And we have so many, I have so many questions here. It's so wonderful. But I think we only have time for one more question. And the question, I just lost it here. Oh, I apologize. I'm scrolling through. Let's see. Oh, so what are your views on HBOT? Should you only do this if your body is in ketosis?
I think the effects are better in ketosis. There does seem to be a correlation between that when they looked at brain tumors using HBOT. So that, yeah, I think actually maybe I'm not, I think HBOD is useful, but it's not the top of my list when it comes to oxygen therapies. You know, I think even just exercising with an oxygen concentrator sort of rates higher than HBOT for cancers like breast cancer. I would choose that ahead of HBOT actually. So, in my opinion.
Well, this has been so wonderful and informative, and I thank you so much, Jane, for going over time. I know we scheduled it from 12 to 1 p.m. and I'm so happy that so many people registered and are interested and have lots of questions. I will follow up with the whole list of registrants with some additional information and the links that you referred to in your presentation, Jane. And again, I'm so grateful that you made time here to be with us and share your incredibly important knowledge as we move forward and try to empower ourselves to stay well, to heal and be well.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.